erstwhile behavior analyst. Welcome. This is the session related to updates from the Behavior Analysis Certification Board. Plus, towards the end of the session, we're going to have an announcement about some recent legislative updates related to behavior analysis in Pennsylvania by Tim Caldwell. It's an honor to have Tim back here. Right now, without any further ado, I'm going to introduce Melissa Nossick, who is a Deputy CEO at the Behavior Analysis Certification Board. She is a friend to this conference and has been here multiple times, and it's always an honor to have Melissa here. And I'm looking for her, and I don't see, there she is, okay. And it's an honor to have her here. Thank you so much, Melissa, for such an important presentation. It's a central part of our conference. Thank you.
Good morning, or good afternoon, I guess. Last year I was here in the morning. I'm going to start today. The title of this talk is about ethics and behavior analysis, but I'm going to start by giving you guys a little bit of an overview about where we're at in the profession right now. So just to give you some background, the BACB is a nonprofit. We were founded in 1998. This was our 20th year anniversary, which is a huge deal. There were a lot of initiatives for credentialing behavior analysts that came before the BACB got a foothold and was able to establish a credential that worked just like other credentials worked, and it took hold and it provided regulation and consumer protection for behavior analysts and has been around since. Our global mission is to protect consumers of behavior analysis services worldwide. And you'll notice, like in our mission, the mission is not to credential more people. The mission is to protect consumers. So a lot of the initiatives that the BACB is engaged in is about consumer protection, not just getting more credential holders. And I'm going to share some of the initiatives that we've been engaged in over the last year with you today. We are an accredited entity. So Jerry Shook used to say that NCCA accreditation is your good housekeeping seal of approval for credentialing entities. And that is true. So all three of our credentials, the RBT, BCABA, and BCBA, are NCCA accredited credentialing programs. So I just wanted to show you this image. So this walks you through the different levels of certification that the BACB offers, from the BCBA or BCBAD designation. The doctoral designation is held by people that have concentrated experience at the PhD level in behavior analysis, and the BCBA being our graduate level credential, the BCABA our undergraduate level credential, and then the registered behavior technician, the technician level credential. And now I'm going to show you some data. Before we start, though, I want to show you where you're going to find all of these data that I'm about to show you. So we recently created a page on our website because we often get inquiries about how many BCBA or BCABA level people are in any particular state. And you can now find that information that is updated in real time on our website. So if you go to About on the BACB website, and then go to About the BACB, and then go to the data page, you will see there all of the information I'm about to show you. And after every testing window and on demand, these numbers are updated regularly. So the overall number of BCBAs per year is on this image. So the y-axis is your number, and across the x-axis the year. And what you see is growth, and that's going to be the story as I click through a number of these slides. So the growth over the last couple years has been exponential, and you'll see that most clearly on this image. So this is new BCBAs per year. And right now, that dot represents 2 exam windows. And after 2 exam windows, we're 55% of where we were last year. So we expect that this year will be another growth year that supersedes any year we have had yet. if you can imagine, when I was credentialed, I think there were around 8,000 BCBAs in total all over the world, and now each year we're bringing in probably close to 6,000 new BCBAs in the year 2018. This is the overall number of BCABAs per year. Similar growth patterns, the lines all go up. Often you don't see this type of data outside of a reinforcement contingency for sure. It sort of looks like fake data, I think, but it's not. So this is the overall number of BCABAs per year, currently over 3,000. Now, what you need to know about this particular credential is this is a credential that people don't get as their terminal credential most of the time. So in this past year, 80% of the BCABAs that we had attrition with went on to become BCBAs. So there's a lot more variability in these data paths, but still the story is there's more. And so this year we're at 55.8% of where we were at last year. So again, we expect more growth this year than we've ever seen at the assistant level. So in total, we have over 30,000 BCBAs and BCABAs currently. The overall number of RBTs now surpassed 40,000, and I will tell you that these data were pulled a couple weeks ago, and so we probably have another 1,500 more RBTs in addition to this. So on average, we receive about 150 applications for RBTs each day. And now here are some Pennsylvania data. So these are the data from currently. I just pulled these this morning. So you have 86 BCBAs, 1,178 BCBAs, 49 BCABAs, and 622 RBTs, with 17 verified course sequences in the state. This represents a 20% increase from what I reported to you guys last year at this time. Now, this is a statistic that we sort of stumbled across as I was sort of gathering data at the BACB one day. So since 2016, so over the course of those years, there's been a 32.6% growth rate of BCBAs. And what that means is that 1 out of every 3 BCBAs in the world were credentialed since 2016. That means that we have an extremely young workforce, or they have been very recently trained. So 1 out of 3, and we expect that in another 2 years, that's going to be 1 out of every 2. So with the youth of this workforce, it means that we have to put a lot of time and energy into our supervision practices and training of new BCBAs that are going to work in the field. So I'm going to focus next on some developments in ethics at the BACB. So it's really exciting that in 2016, mind you, the BACB introduced the first comprehensive ethics code. And that code of conduct was the first time that we were able to actually receive notices of alleged violation against a BCBA or BCABA or any certificant that was engaged in unethical behavior. So we just recently published a white paper on the first 2 years of those data. So the link is on this slide where you can find this report, and it contains the data that I'm about to share with you all. So I just wanted to show you over the years the ethics developments that have happened at the BACB. And there have been standards changes and increases in the area of ethics to include maintenance requirements, so continuing education in the area of ethics. There also has been coursework introductions where more hours of coursework for behavior analysts are in the area of ethics. And I highlighted the last part of this area graph. So the bottom of the area graph represents the number of BCBAs at the time that one of those standards or one of the changes were introduced. And I thought the most the most telling one of those was the ethics course that is required now. A 3-credit ethics course was introduced in 2015, and since then, 40% of our workforce has been credentialed. So that means 40% of the BCBAs out there have had to take a 3-credit ethics course and have been around since the new Code of Ethics has been introduced. Some of you might remember a time when the ethics code was not as actionable, and you might be able to think back about some action that you might have taken 10 years ago that you couldn't because we didn't have that mechanism. So now that we have that, we are receiving reports when we have bad actors. And so we have culled those data together, and I'm going to walk through those here shortly. This is another metric that I just wanted to share with everybody. So in addition to developments in the area of ethics coming on just in the last decade, which most other professions have established ethics systems and cultures for many, many, many years. So us being just 10 years into this is something special about behavior analysis for sure. So to add to that, we took a look at the practice-related ethics literature. So any literature that was aimed at conveying information to help practitioners to do a better job in these areas. And you will see that, and this is just very, as of about a week ago, there are now 23 publications on the topic of the ethics. And these data, just the last 2 years represents more than half of this literature. So not only is our ability to take action on ethics-related issues and the ethics code itself very new, but the literature for supporting practitioners in the profession is also incredibly new. Here is a link which I will share later, but it has the references to each of these articles that were included in this data set. So if anybody needs it, I can come back to this later in the presentation. Okay, now we get to the good stuff. So these are the disciplinary data for the last 2 years from the BACB. So I first wanted to talk a little bit about our disciplinary system. So the BACB receives a notice, and that's our shorthand for a notice of alleged violation because that's sort of a long word. So we receive a notice, and then it can go to one of 3 routes. There's a disciplinary review committee, a code compliance committee, and then there are these other places that a notice could be routed depending on what it's about. So a disciplinary review committee is a committee of peers that review sort of the most egregious violations that we have evidence to support some type of determination about that notice. The Code Compliance Committee is a system that is unique to the BACB's disciplinary system. So most other credentialing entities, they do not have the system where you provide education to a behavior analyst that has made a more minor ethics violation, like forgot to sign a supervision form, or something more of a minor nature that could be remediated through education. And so we have a system of about 30 coaches that are assigned to different areas of the ethics code. And when a NAV is routed to the coaching system, that person says, I don't want to go through disciplinary review. I'm willing to work with a coach to correct what this violation was. And then they are able to avoid the due process of the disciplinary system, which can take upwards of 3 months to 2 years, because we are required to go through due process for anybody that goes through that system. So it can be quite time consuming, and a lot of times for more minor offenses, people are willing and happy to go through this coaching system, and we get lots of reports about how beneficial it has been. So that is another aspect of that system that has been really nice to see. There are other avenues for notices that come into our system, like if there is not enough evidence submitted as a part of the notice, they may receive a one-time warning. We sometimes decline a notice. Sometimes the notice is withdrawn because after it is submitted, the behavior analyst or the person addresses it with the person that was the subject of the notice, and the person corrects it. And so then the notifier says, I don't mean it anymore because they corrected it. And then sometimes we have these third-party notices, and these are cases where there is a licensure board in the state where the notifier submitted the notice. And if there is a licensure board actively doing an investigation or taking action on a notice, then the BACB will hold that notice until a determination has been made by the licensure board. Because they are an investigatory entity and probably are going to make a decision based on more information that we may have. So the data that I'm about to share are about notices that have gone through our system. So the boxes highlighted in yellow on this slide. So the number of code violations per case I thought was interesting, or something interesting to share, because anytime we get a notice about a number of different types of violations for any one case. So these data capture a total of 219 cases that were opened and closed in 2016 and 17. And out of those 219 cases, there were 478 total violations that were found, not submitted. Sometimes we get 7 different types of violations submitted, but the disciplinary review committee may have only been able to find evidence to support 2 of those types of violations. So they're often multiple per case, and you can see from the pie chart there were a very few number that had more than 5 types of violations in those cases, but most of the time it's 1 violation, and in 74 of those cases there was only 1 violation. Okay, so these are the violation types, and I'm going to cover the top 3 of these along with some resources and share with you some of the specific circumstances that led to these violations, with the hope that identifying these areas that behavior analysts are struggling or that we're seeing the most types of violations, that it will lead to improved practices around supervision and training to help trainees, and maybe in your own practice, in your own shop, avoid these types of problems. So the first and the most reported type of violation was improper or inadequate supervision. So this is section 5.0 of the code, and essentially this says everything behavior analytics supervision. Make sure that you are overseeing your people properly and that you're providing the right amount of supervision. And so the complaints that we've seen around this mostly apply to 5.0, but in a lot of cases 10.0 was also implicated as a piece of these types of cases. So compliance with supervision and coursework standards as well. So here are some examples. The supervision contract not being followed. Gosh, the supervision contract in so many cases has been problematic because maybe the termination of a contract criteria were not operationally defined. And so in those cases, it's very hard for us to take action when the supervisor didn't produce a contract that had operationally defined terms for when the supervision contract would be terminated or when they wouldn't sign off on experience hours, for example. The supervisor being disorganized was one of the primary responses. So when a case like this goes through our disciplinary review committee, the subject of a notice has an opportunity to respond. And in more cases than none, the supervisor was simply disorganized. They canceled or missed supervision meetings. And so just making sure you have a system of organization that keeps you getting to meetings on time, not missing them, not canceling them, is a really nice way to prevent it. The supervisor not knowing the supervision requirements or not completing them. The supervisor not following the BACB experience standards. And then here are some prevention techniques. So design systems for providing supervision in your work environment. Talking to each other about your supervision systems are super important. documenting the supervision plan in your contract so that it is really clear what the plan is, using self-management and time management strategies, addressing problems when they are minor, and don't avoid difficult conversations with the trainee. Now, I have some resources that I'm going to share with you for this particular issue because there's been a lot published in this area that's been super helpful. And so I'm going to share those. Oh, and identify corrective actions. Okay, so the first resource, so a special issue of Behavior Analyst in Practice focused exclusively on supervision practices. So this issue was edited by James Louiselli and Linda LeBlanc, and it included this article. So, taking full responsibility, the ethics of supervision and behavior analytic practice. This also is one of the articles on the list that I shared via that URL earlier. And so this whole article was about section 5.0 of the code and what mechanisms or what ways in which you can ensure that your supervisees are meeting that code. This one was good too, so recommendations for detecting and addressing barriers to successful supervision. In this particular article, there was actually a table that included some of the supervision barriers and had recommendations for how to address those barriers. They also had an appendix that I thought was cool, so it's sort of like a user guide for conducting journal clubs. This is a recent book that I've read that it really makes a difference. So Crucial Conversations walks you through how to have difficult conversations. And I think that in the supervision experience, one thing that we probably all have a very difficult time doing is having difficult conversations. I struggled with it for many years of my career, actually. And I think most people tend to avoid them and hope the issue will get better. But this book is super helpful because it teaches you about those times when you just want to sit back from the table. It teaches you how to lean in and ask questions and have dialogue with your supervisee that will matter. And until you demonstrate those skills with your supervisee, they won't learn to do those things themselves. And the only way to resolve difficulties that they might be having with a client or with a colleague is to lean into those conversations. Tom Critchfield published a review of this particular book. And I think for supervisors, if you haven't read both of these, put this on your list. It's such an important skill, and it's something you don't learn in graduate school, but is going to make a difference in your relationships, not just with your supervisees, but the people that you serve, and maybe even in your personal life. Okay, so the second most reported type of issue was failure to report or respond in a timely manner. So the BACB requires that you report things, investigations, ethical misconduct within 30 days. And what we found is a lot of people get to incarceration, felony conviction, mental health problems, insurance, licensure board, or professional association investigation or sanctions, have these things happen, and then when it's time to become get their recertification, that is when they report it, which is after the 30-day period within which you're supposed to report it. And right now, because of all of the activity in funding services and in Medicaid investigations across the country, this is a common problem. And so just some prevention techniques, to be honest with you, just teaching about this requirement should help resolve these types of issues. Most people aren't aware that they have to report and what they have to report. So when you're working with people, make sure that they're aware of these things. Identify the activities that require reporting. Report changes in supervisory status immediately. So this is another, we will receive a report against a certificant, and when we reach out to their listed supervisor, their supervisor says, I haven't been overseeing them for 4 months. So make sure you are meeting your reporting requirement of changing supervisees on your record as soon as you're no longer supervising them. Reporting investigations immediately. Being aware of licensure board reporting requirements, also very important. So now we have licensure in 30 states. So it's super important that if you're working or practicing in a state that has licensure, that you're aware of your licensure board reporting requirements as well. And being aware of professional insurance liability reporting requirements, because those are also, if you're being investigated or have any requirements in that domain, they also have to be reported. So the resources, so on our webpage, there are resources for reporting where there is a portal where you just submit any documentation. And in 2 newsletters, both the November newsletter and the April newsletter, we have published some responses to common questions that we get about this reporting requirement, like, no, you don't have to report parking tickets or speeding tickets that are under a certain amount or don't impact consumers in a negative way. And there is a portal where you submit your legal documentation, and I just highlighted it on this slide for you, and this is sort of what it looks like. It's pretty easy contact form, and it goes to a special section of our organization, and are a couple of people that handle all of these types of issues. And the third category here is professionalism and integrity. So professionalism and integrity is a really broad category. It includes some sections of 1.0 and some sections of 7.0. And this essentially is a broad category of be a good person, make sure that you adhere to your contractual obligations, make sure you transition cases appropriately. So here are some examples of violations in this area. So communications with clients and families that were unprofessional, professional interactions and relationships with coworkers, clients, and supervisees, practicing within your scope of competence. So there are a number of BCBAs that are duly credentialed, and they just need to make sure that they are making it clear when they are practicing under the scope of their BCBA credential versus when they're practicing under the scope of or recommending treatment procedures under the scope of a different credential. And the use of non-behavioral treatment approaches and discrimination or harassment towards trainees or clients. And these were actual types of cases that were reported to us in the last 2 years. Okay, so prevention. Self-evaluate your scope of competence and seek supervision if necessary. If duly credentialed, clearly identify interventions that are not being recommended in your capacity as a behavior analyst. Model professional interactions and identify warning signs and monitor for indicators of potential dual relationships. This is important in practice for sure, because there are always signs when a technician or one of your staff are not working well with a family. If you can identify those flags and have the ability to modify work plans so that that situation doesn't exist, it may prevent a situation like this from happening. And then offer a reporting and resolution system within your agency. That is one of the things that when these issues occur, that our coaches have put together systems, templates, and processes that we're getting ready to make public so that the community of behavior analysts that might benefit from those types of templates will be able to use them. So here are some resources in this professionalism and integrity area. So this article by Matthew Broadhead and Tom Higbee from Utah State University was a perspectives issue in behavior analysts in practice, and it's called Teaching and Maintaining Ethical Behavior in a Professional Organization. And the thing that I liked most about this article is that they talk about establishing an ethical community within your agency, but they also give variations depending on the amount of resources you have to do that. So if you're limited in resources, maybe you have a ethical compliance officer and you collaborate with other organizations to provide that support and resources. This one was a great recent publication by Broadhead, Quigley, and Cox. They actually just also published an ethics book for the profession. It's only the second one that has been published. So this article is how to identify ethical practices in organizations prior to employment. And I loved, they had a table in here that you could give to your supervisees of questions to ask the agency that you're going to become employed with to identify what their ethical culture within their organization is like. So the disciplinary system includes these 3 arms. Sorry guys, my slides are getting funky. Okay. Okay, those are the 3 categories of ethics violations that we have seen. And now I'm going to show you the disciplinary review committee only violations. So these are the top 3 from the overall number, but just in a slightly different order. And so this bar graph shows that 86 cases of those 219 went to disciplinary review committee, and all the others took some other type of avenue. And out of these actions taken by DRC, you'll see that the x-axis goes from most restrictive to least restrictive, and corrective action being the most number of cases assigned corrective actions of some sort, and there were 41 of those. An advisory warning, there were 12 of those, but only 8 revocations over the last 2 years. And we expect that as licensure entities in the U.S. start to more effectively run their disciplinary systems, we'll start, the investigatory capacity of a licensure board is much more than the BACB's scope of disciplinary activity because of their immunity to being sued. So the BACB as a certifying entity, we're not an investigatory body, so we can't gather additional evidence when we don't have enough evidence to take some action. But a licensure board does have that ability to take those actions, gather more information, and do a little bit more investigation than we do. So we tend to defer to the licensure board when there is a state that has a licensure board that has a disciplinary function in place and that is running. Okay, so I think the most important part of this discussion about what's going on in ethics, right? The message right now is it's new. The ethics code has only been in place for 2 years. We're getting more literature out there that is focused on the area of ethics. But I think the most important thing to teach is what you do when you see a possible ethics violation. So the first question you might ask is the misbehavior a code violation? And I would recommend going straight to the code for that and looking at the code to see if it is indeed an ethics violation. The BACB can't provide advisement on when something could or couldn't be an ethical violation. So if you called up or emailed and said, hey, I had this situation happen, is this an ethics violation and should I report it? We can't say anything about that because we're the disciplinary arm. And so this is some of the lawyer words that I've used since working at the BACB, but detrimental reliance is the situation that occurs when that BACB calls us and say we give them some advice and they omit some critical details of the situation which lead us to say, no, you're fine. In 2 months, we get an actual notice from somebody that's associated with that situation, and they provide the other side of the story. And the other side of the story says it is indeed an ethics violation. Because we have already responded to it, that person that asked us for advice relied on our advice to their detriment. And that's what detrimental reliance is, and we would be prohibited from taking action on such a case. So the BACB does not provide interpretations of the ethics code, and we can't provide advice to people seeking advice, but we can refer people to ABAI, who has a hotline. But this, I would say, is your last resort. My first recommendation would be to get a trusted colleague. Have a colleague that you consult with about ethical issues. Build an ethical culture within your agency and with agencies around you so that you have people to go to talk about these things and you can get quick answers. Because when something unethical or you think that is unethical has happened, it's really helpful to have some discourse about it rather than just an email correspondence. So I highly recommend that if you don't have an ethical culture set up within your community of behavior analysts around you, that you start working on that before anything else. Okay, so the second step is contact. So section 7.02 of our code requires that you try to address that issue with a person immediately, or as soon as possible. But this is probably the most important step of when you see unethical behavior happening, and this is where crucial conversations come in, right? And I recommend, if you have to have one of these crucial conversations, that you go back to that book. I still, to this day, even after having read it years ago, when I have to have a difficult conversation, I go back to it. Because when you have that crucial conversation and it's effective to address an ethical issue, when you think about submitting a notice to the BACB, you have to think about whether that is going to solve anything for that person. And if you could have talked to them and they might have said, oh my gosh, I didn't even realize I did that, and make the correction, then you're taking steps forward. Because if you don't take that step, and I've had people talk to me personally about things that they've seen or heard that they thought were unethical, and my first question is, before you're talking to me about this and making me aware of this, have you talked to them? I wouldn't want to be the person that was being talked to. So do your colleagues a favor and hope that they would do the same favor for you if they viewed something that you did as unethical before they reported it. And just to let you know, this is standard practice in other professions. So this is section 7.02 of the code. It also is in the psychology code of conduct, that you go to the person that you believe to have violated the ethics code first. Okay, so if it's not resolved, then you're going to file a report. So this is a notice to the BACB. And on our website, there is a whole section that is just notice of alleged violation. It walks you through every step of filling this out, including that the behavior has to be linked to specific elements of the code throughout that document. If it is resolved, I think this is perhaps the most important piece of this whole process. However it ends up being resolved, take it back to your agency. Not the actual case, of course, but what was at the root cause of why the ethics violation occurred, and put some systems in place in your house to make sure that it doesn't happen in the context of your agency and the people that are working for you. So learn from those observations and put things in place to make sure that they don't happen. So I just want to go back to this statistic. So 32.6% of our workforce is here since 2016. That means 1 out of every 3 are new to the profession within the last 2 years. It means in the next 2 years, 1 out of every 2 of people in the profession will have been credentialed in the last 5 years. It means we have a lot of work to do together to make sure that we are talking about ethics, that we're talking about supervision, that instead of sitting back when these important things happen, that we're leaning in and asking questions and creating dialogue. So on that note, I also wanted to share this resource. So employment demand for behavior analysis. How about this statistic? Annual demand for individuals holding a BCBA or BCBAD certification has increased approximately 800% from 2010 to 2017. The Bureau of Labor Statistics and the Department of Labor think that behavior analysis is a pretty unique profession because of the growth that we have seen. This report that we have produced over the last 2 years, when I get on the phone with the people from Burning Glass, which is the database that they specially programmed to include our credentials because we're not currently classified as an occupation. So getting these data is not an easy task, but hopefully within the next few years it will be when we get to the point where we are classified. But when I get on the phone with these people, they say, what is going on in behavior analysis? And they are amazed at the growth. Regulatory activity has happened over the last 9 years. Over 9 years, 30 states have adopted licensure laws in the U.S. In occupational therapy, the last state had licensure 2 years ago, and it took them over 40 years to do that. So this growth is sort of unprecedented, and it has happened really quickly. And I'm sure if you're an organization owner, that you're coming into contact with growing pains. At the BACB, we're doing the same, but we're trying real hard to keep up with the curve here. One of the things that we are trying to do for the profession, our mission, again, it's not tied to credentialing. And so with all this growth happening, there's definitely the potential of there being misunderstanding about what behavior analysis is. And so one of our missions is to make sure that we're disseminating behavior analysis to general audiences accurately. And so something that we have done recently is we published a video, and I want to share that with you to end the presentation today.
What is behavior analysis? It's about people and the scientific study of their learning and behavior. Over 100 years ago, the underlying philosophy of behavior analysis was introduced. The best way to understand people is to focus on their behavior, the things they do and say. Over the next few decades, this viewpoint inspired a number of researchers who discovered the general reasons why people do what they do. Their core discovery was that the events immediately following behavior determine whether it will be repeated in the future. This is known as the principle of reinforcement. In the 1950s and 60s, researchers began using these discoveries to improve people's lives through behavior change. These efforts led to the development of an applied science called Applied Behavior Analysis, or ABA, the foundation of our modern-day practice. Today, there are tens of thousands of credentialed behavior analysts who help individuals, families, communities, and organizations achieve meaningful behavior change. ABA treatment has shown to be effective in solving problems in a variety of areas. ABA is best known for its success in treating autism spectrum disorder. Decades of research have shown that intensive ABA treatment is the most successful approach for children with autism, and in some cases can eliminate almost all symptoms. ABA treatment has been widely recognized as an effective treatment for autism spectrum disorder by a number of sources, including the U.S. Surgeon General, the American Academy of Pediatrics, and the National Institute of Mental Health. Parent training programs based on applied behavior analysis often teach biological and foster parents the skills they need to create safe, positive, and nurturing environments for their children. Recent research has shown that state-administered ABA parent training programs can keep families together while reducing state costs. In the area of organizational behavior management, consultants improve employee performance, workplace culture, and business outcomes by assessing and changing the work environment of its employees and leaders. A popular specialty in this area is behavior-based safety, which is a widely recognized and effective method for keeping employees safe and healthy while on the job. In dementia treatment and elder care, behavior analysts treat aging-related issues such as memory problems, health issues, wandering, medication adherence, and more. Over the past 50 years, behavior gerontologists have demonstrated that their services can improve the health and quality of life of older adults. These are just a few of the areas that applied behavior analysis has improved lives. And there are many more areas where behavior analysts are working hard to address the world's problems. If you would like to learn more about behavior analysis, visit the following websites for more information.
So we have an additional video coming out later this spring on ABA that will be built and include 9 different practice areas for dissemination to a general audience, but we're going to keep working on this particular mission. And I just wanted to end today by letting you all know that the sentiment Dr. Fryman shared early this morning about the people doing this work being angels couldn't be more true. Thank you guys for doing the work that you're doing. The BACB is going to continue to try to support your activities, and thank you for your time today.
Thank you so much, Melissa. Okay, what we're going to do now is Tim is going to give us an update on some activities of ABA and PA. Tim will talk for, what, about 10 minutes, something like that, 5. And then following that, Melissa has agreed to allow some time for question and answer. So we'll probably have to put a cap on how long that runs, but we will have some opportunities for questions and answers after Tim's presentation. I give you Tim Caldwell.
Thank you. So I'm here today. I'm going to be very brief. We don't have a ton of information, but I also will be sticking around after Dr. Nosik's question and answer if you guys have questions, because I'm not going to take questions during the presentation. I'm here to talk about the Better Access to Treatment Act, which is statewide legislation that the ABA and PA initiative is working towards to create an actual license for behavior analysts. If you're not familiar with the ABA and PA initiative, it's an organization that's been around for about 5 years. It was started by Dr. Cheryl Tierney, who's a developmental pediatrician who wanted to see better access to care, ABA-specific care for her clients. It is now an organization of around 100 people, behavior analysts, parents and caregivers, some other professionals that are related. And the disclosure here, this initiative has been led by ABA and PA solely. So what are we trying to do with this legislation, this proposed legislation? Really, we're trying to do 2 main things. We would like behavior analysis to be officially recognized as a distinct discipline in the state of Pennsylvania. Behavior analysis has long been kind of wrapped into other professions and other fields, and we really want to make the point and help our citizens within the state, our friends and family, and those people that need these services understand that there is a route to go that's different than the traditional mental health service system. We also want to work on being able to increase access to high quality care, high quality treatment. So we're looking at, Dr. Nosik said this within her presentation, licensure laws are really built around consumer protection. How do we make sure those individuals that need these services are being provided those services, not just in a way that they're getting better, but in a way that is ethical and is treating them effectively? The key features that we look at, we are working on developing the proposed legislation. We're working with 2 representatives. I'll talk about that in a little bit. But the components that we are looking at is that our proposed legislation is going to be based directly on the board's Model Licensure Act. A key component of that is that licensure will be tied to being certified as either a behavior analyst or an assistant behavior analyst. So if you are a BCBA or a BCABA, that would be your qualification to become licensed within the state of Pennsylvania. We're also looking to directly tie all professional and ethical conduct standards into the board standards as well. We would do that in a way that if, as the board evolves and they change their standards, the licensure components would go along with that. And then another key component would be we are proposing to create an independent behavior analyst licensure board. That would have both the ability to create and enact new rules and regulations around behavior analyst licensure, and also to handle those ethical and disciplinary actions that need to occur and handle them at a state level. Again, Dr. Nozick, I appreciate you gave a lot of nice segues into my short presentation, talking about that idea that the board is limited in their investigatory ability, whereas a state licensure board could really go a lot farther in protecting consumers. The other key feature of this Licensure Act is it's not going to be tied to a diagnosis. We are looking at licensing behavior analysts for them to be able to practice in areas where research that has been able to show that behavior analysis can help the public. So the board video gave some nice illustrations of different areas. We think about elder care, dementia. There's some nice research out there on Alzheimer's disorder. Substance abuse. ABAI is doing a conference this November in Washington, D.C. on substance abuse, and there's some research that has come out that supports behavior analysis in that realm. But then also looking outside of traditional mental health services and treatment and thinking about wellness and exercise, helping people to stick and adhere to diet and exercise routines, medication management, different things like that. You know, we have a lot of good technology that can be supportive of these individuals, but at this point we're not allowed to practice, or we're not able to really get paid for practicing in those areas. So this licensure initiative would really look at opening the door to providing better access to behavior analysis services across a bunch of different areas. Now, we do have autism insurance legislation, Act 62. As a part of that, there was a license that was created, the Behavior Specialist License. It is really important to understand that the BSL is not a behavior analyst license in any way. It's a license to provide services and get paid for those services for individuals with an autism spectrum disorder diagnosis. The licensed behavior analyst, or the behavior analyst license, would really look at licensing the profession and the practice of behavior analysis in the state of Pennsylvania. One of the things that we're going to be working on including in the law is working that if you have a behavior analyst license, you would not need the behavior specialist license to work with individuals within the state. So where are we now? Last week, Representative Tom Mahaffey and Representative Tom Mert introduced a memo to the PA State House of Representatives in order to potentially line up a vote and get co-sponsors for this legislative action, and they would like to do it in the month of September. I will say that this has been a very fast-moving process. You know, we've benefited from being able to meet with the board. We've benefited from being able to meet with Dr. Gina Green at APBA to try and move forward with this. But we're on a pretty tight time frame working through this. Tom Mert, Representative Mert specifically, has been very, very instrumental in pushing this forward and really giving us support. So what are we hopefully asking of you guys? Go out to ABA and PA. We have a booth here this week that has a lot of information about this proposed legislation. I will be available throughout the week. If you want to talk to me, I'm going to be available, like I said, after the session. Go to our website, our Facebook page. Go to we'll have information up on Twitter as well. Learn about the Act, ask questions about the Act, talk to other people about behavior analyst licensure, other BCBAs, parents and caregivers, and think about some of the things that you know, how it could impact, and there's questions that you have, and bring them to us because we want to hear from you guys. And as you start to learn about and you see the real benefit of what licensure could do for our field and what it could do for the individuals in our state, we ask that you start to be supportive of that. You know, calling up your representatives. Right now, we're looking for more co-sponsors to that bill. We have 2, but the more co-sponsors you have, the more likely it is to actually come to a vote. And when it does come to a vote, we really want the community to get out there and to call their legislators and let them know that we want better access to care for our friends and our family members in the community in the state of Pennsylvania. This is our website. Again, we're on Facebook and Twitter. Just come and find us and talk to us, get information about the proposed legislation. And thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Tim. All right. I'm going to give the code for Melissa's session. so that if anybody has commitments, you can go that direction. But Melissa will be available. She'll come up and answer some questions to the group. If you are leaving, please leave as quietly as possible so as not to interrupt the discussion. And we'll probably have a question and answer period for about a 10 or 15 minute period. Okay, the code for the session is RDI 245. And I hope make your I look like a 1, because I'm not sure it's a 1 or an I. So it's RDI 245. Thank you. Melissa?